I'm 35, a freelance photographer who spends more time editing other people's weddings than living anything remotely romantic myself. I rent a small studio apartment that always smells like coffee and dust from my gear, and my idea of a wild night is color grading until 2 a.m. while a true crime podcast mumbles in the background. On paper, my life is boring but stable. Clients pay on time, my camera bodies are insured. My back only complains when I forget to stretch. What no one knows, not my clients, not my ex, not even my older sister who thinks she knows everything about me, is that the weirdest, scariest, most surreal thing that's ever happened in my life started with a used lens kit I bought off a guy on Marketplace because I was trying to save a few $100. That's it. No heist, no hacking, no dark web nonsense. Just me refreshing listings at midnight, looking for a bargain. I picked up an old Pelican case from the trunk of a dented Corolla in a grocery store parking lot. Cash, a quick handshake, the usual awkward small talk about aperture, and they don't make them like this anymore. I drove home thinking I'd scored a 70 to 200 millimeters for half price. Instead, when I opened the phone, I found something that dragged me straight back into a part of my past I'd spent a decade trying very hard to forget. To explain why that stupid little metal stick in the lens case shook me so badly, I have to go back to when I was 19 and thought Bitcoin sounded like a punchline. My roommate back then, Leo, was the opposite. He was one of those early adopter guys who built a noisy mining rig in our dorm and talked about future-proofing our lives while eating instant noodles. I rolled my eyes, but I let him plug the thing into my outlet because he covered most of the Wi-Fi. One night, he convinced me to throw in what little money I had, tips from a coffee shop job and the sad remains of a savings account my grandmother started. "We'll split everything 50-50, he said, eyes bright behind smudged glasses. "You'll thank me when we're not poor in our 30s. So we did it. We pooled, we bought, we watched numbers flicker on a janky laptop screen. And then, a few months later, after a brutal fight about rent and my lack of vision, Leo vanished. Dropped out, changed numbers, social media gone. Along with him disappeared the laptop, the wallet file, and the little USB drive he'd called the key to our future. My half of that future was worth nothing but regret. Or so I thought. It looks like you want to continue the story, even though you repeated the title. I'll proceed with part 3, 1,250 to 1,350 characters, unless you tell me otherwise. When Leo disappeared, the fallout hit me harder than I admitted at the time. I wasn't just broke, I was humiliated. I trusted someone who treated our deal like a joke. And when people asked what happened to my savings, I lied, said I'd spend it on gear or textbooks, or a last-minute trip I pretended not to regret. Anything sounded better than the truth. I'd handed over everything I had to a friend who walked out with both our futures zipped into a backpack. I reported the laptop stolen, but the police shrugged. We were roommates, not strangers. It was a civil issue, not a crime. My parents lectured me about responsibility. My manager cut my shifts because I was distracted, and my sister told me it was a lesson I probably needed. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the story people built around me after that. Reckless, naive, too trusting, the kind of person who'd fall for anything with a blinking cursor and a sales pitch. That reputation stuck. I stopped taking risks, financially or otherwise. I learned to double-check every agreement, every password, every person who promised they meant well. I became the kind of adult who flinched at anything involving shared responsibility. And for years, anytime Bitcoin news popped up, especially when its value skyrocketed, I felt a sour twist in my stomach, because every headline was a reminder of what I'd almost had, and who had taken it. If you want part 4 next, just say next. The years rolled on quietly after that. Quiet in that dull, grinding way life gets when you're just trying to outrun your own embarrassment. I finished school, moved apartments 5 times, cycled through relationships that all ended for predictable reasons. I didn't trust easily, and I never let anyone see the parts of me that still felt 19 and stupid. Bitcoin became a background myth, something people bragged about at parties. If I'd bought in 2012, and I'd smile like I wasn't swallowing bitterness. Whenever I thought of Leo, it wasn't anger anymore. It was this hollow ache, like something unfinished had calcified in my chest. Sometimes I wondered if he was dead, or rich, or living out of a van in some desert. Mostly I tried not to wonder at all. Still, the regret lingered, not just over the money, but the way that moment shaped me. I became hyper-cautious with everything. Work, relationships, finances. I triple-backed up files, saved receipts, checked locks twice, researched every purchase. My friends joked that dating me was like dating a risk assessment spreadsheet. And beneath all that caution, there was fear. Fear that I was permanently marked by that one mistake, destined to repeat it. Fear that Leo hadn't just taken my savings. He'd taken the version of me that believed good intentions were enough. Nothing in my life hinted the past would ever resurface. Nothing prepared me for the way it actually did. All it took was a lens case. The trigger came on a Thursday night, after a long shoot where a bride insisted on posing with her dog in 15 different themed bandanas. I came home exhausted, tossed my gear on the couch, and finally opened the used Pelican case I'd bought earlier. I expected fingerprints, dust, maybe a loose screw. What I didn't expect was the false bottom. It wasn't obvious at first. The foam looked normal, but when I pulled out the lens cavity insert, the layer beneath shifted slightly, too light, too hollow. My stomach tightened in that instinctual way it does when something isn't right. I peeled back the foam and found a narrow compartment lined with tape someone had cut carefully, deliberately. Inside lay a small metal USB stick, sleek, weighty, unbranded. The kind used for cold storage crypto wallets. I froze, a weird buzzing settling behind my ribs. I hadn't seen one like it since Leo. At first, I told myself it had nothing to do with him. Thousands of people used hardware wallets. But then I noticed two letters scratched faintly into the metal, as if done with a key or screwdriver. L.A. Leo Atwood. My throat tightened. I sat down hard on the couch, the USB burning in my palm like a ghost I'd never expected to touch again. It made no sense. How would his key end up inside a stranger's lens case? Decades later. And why now? I didn't know, but every part of me understood one thing. This wasn't an accident. Shock isn't dramatic. It's not gasping or dropping things or shouting. It's quiet, paralyzing. I sat there staring at the USB until the room felt tilted, like gravity had shifted 2 degrees to the left. My mind kept trying to supply practical explanations. Maybe L.A. stood for something else, maybe the seller used it as a storage drive, maybe it was empty. But each theory dissolved under one brutal fact. I knew that shape, that weight. Leo used to twirl an identical drive between his fingers whenever he bragged about our future fortune. My hands started to sweat. A sick heat crawled up my spine. I hadn't thought about that night, the fight, the slammed door, the echo of his footsteps in the hallway in years. Suddenly it was back like it had happened last week. I tried plugging the USB into my laptop, but I couldn't do it. My fingertips hovered over the port, trembling. Part of me wanted answers. The other part feared what answers would require: responsibility, decisions, consequences. Secrets don't stay secrets without taking something from you. Finally, I set the drive on the table and backed away like it might explode. If this really was Leo's key, then it could contain everything we mined. Everything he'd taken. Everything I'd lost. And if it wasn't his, then someone had gone to a lot of trouble to make me think it was. Either way, the past wasn't done with me. Not even close. I didn't sleep that night. I kept checking the Pelican case, the USB, my laptop, like any of it would rearrange itself into something less impossible if I stared long enough. By morning, logic finally elbowed fear aside. The marketplace seller had to know something. Even if he didn't put the USB there, he'd know where the kit came from. So I messaged him, tried to sound casual. Hey, quick question. Did the lens case come with anything extra? Just noticed something odd. He replied almost immediately. Can we talk on the phone? Easier than typing. My stomach dropped. People don't switch to calls unless things are messy. When he answered, his voice was younger than I expected, nervous, almost apologetic. Look, man, I didn't know there was anything weird in that case. It belonged to my uncle. I'm just clearing out his storage. Your uncle? I asked. Was he a photographer? A long pause. Not exactly. He collected things. Bought abandoned storage units, estate sale leftovers, stuff like that. And the lens kit came from one of those? Another pause, longer, heavier. Yeah, from a unit that was in default for like 10 years. Honestly, I shouldn't even have sold it before sorting it. I didn't think someone would actually open the bottom. Something tightened in my chest. Do you know who the unit originally belonged to? His breath hitched, barely audible but real. Yeah, he said. I do. He hesitated, then added quietly. His name was Leo. The moment he said Leo's name, something electric shot through me. Fear, disbelief, anger, all tangled together. My grip tightened on the phone. Leo Atwood? I asked, even though I already knew. Yeah, he said. That's the name on the paperwork. I didn't think it mattered. I mean, the unit's been abandoned forever. Abandoned. My mind snagged on that word. Leo never struck me as the type to just forget something, let alone a storage unit filled with his tech. Why was the unit forfeited? I asked. He exhaled shakily. Missed payments. For years. It went unpaid after 2014, I think. The facility tried contacting him, but he trailed off, then added, Look, I don't know how to tell you this gently. My uncle said they couldn't reach the guy because he died. The room went quiet around me. Dead. My brain fought it, rejected it. Leo wasn't supposed to just vanish and die. That wasn't how unfinished stories worked. He was supposed to show up someday, apologize or brag or explain. Anything but this. What happened? I forced out. Accident, the seller said. That's all the paperwork said. I felt something inside me collapse. Not neatly, but in jagged pieces. If he died, then whatever was on that USB wasn't bait or manipulation. It was a relic, a final breadcrumb from someone I'd spent 10 years resenting, another 10 trying not to think about, and now would never speak to again. And the biggest twist, the one I didn't know how to hold, was still waiting. When the call ended, I just sat there on the edge of my bed, phone dangling from my hand, staring at nothing. The news hit in uneven waves. First numbness, then shock, then a grief I didn't feel entitled to. Leo and I hadn't spoken in over a decade. He'd betrayed me. He'd vanished. He'd taken what little safety I had and turned it into a lesson I'd never stopped paying for. But underneath all the bitterness, there had always been this stubborn thread of unfinished business. Some part of me expected I'd confront him someday, demand answers, maybe even laugh about the whole thing once enough time had scabbed over. Now that possibility evaporated, and the hollow space it left behind felt too big for my chest. I kept thinking about the storage unit, how he must have rented it intentionally, how he'd tucked away his life there, how no one claimed it when he died. Had he been alone? Sick? Broke? Scared? Then my mind snapped back to the USB, to the scratched initials, to the impossible idea that, after everything, Leo's future fortune might still exist, locked behind a key I never expected to see again. The past wasn't just resurfacing. It was rewriting itself. And suddenly I wasn't sure what scared me more. The possibility that the drive held nothing, or the possibility that it held everything Leo once promised. By evening, the USB sat in the center of my desk like an accusation. I circled it the way you circle a wild animal. Curious, terrified, unsure if touching it would save me or tear open something I wasn't ready for. Half of me wanted to plug it in immediately, crack it open, finally know. The other half was drowning in a Messier truth. If the wallet was real, if the crypto was still there, then Leo hadn't just left me with regret. He'd left me with responsibility. Maybe even a fortune neither of us knew how to carry. Anger flared next, sharp, vindicating. You should have told me, I muttered to no one. You shouldn't have left me with this. But right behind the anger came guilt, thick enough to choke on. Leo had died alone, and I had spent years hating him for abandoning me when maybe he'd been fighting battles I never saw. That realization stung worse than any betrayal. Eventually, I grabbed the USB, intending to shove it in a drawer and deal with it tomorrow. But my hand froze halfway. Avoidance was how I'd lived half my life, and it hadn't made anything better. I sat down, opened my laptop, and hovered the cursor over the port. My pulse hammered. What if this changes everything? I whispered, but the real question pulsed louder beneath it. What if it changes nothing, and I've been wrong all these years? Before I could plug the USB in, my laptop lit up with an incoming call. An unknown number. For a second, I thought it was the marketplace seller again. But when I answered, the voice on the line was older, raspier, and carried a familiarity that hit me in the gut before my brain recognized it. Is this Marcus? The man asked. Yes, I said slowly. Who's calling? A pause. Then, my name is Alan Atwood. I'm Leo's father. I went still. I didn't even know Leo had a father in the picture. He'd always talked like his family was a subject to avoid. I heard you bought some of his things, Alan said. The storage facility contacted me when they learned someone was asking questions. My throat tightened. I didn't mean to. It's all right, he said gently. You were his friend once. The past tense stung. Alan took a shaky breath. Leo kept more secrets than anyone realized. He was brilliant, but he carried burdens. When he died, I tried to go through his belongings, but there was so much I didn't understand. Tech, files, encrypted drives. Honestly, it scared me. My eyes drifted to the USB. Did he ever mention me? I asked, barely above a whisper. Another long silence. He mentioned you more than anyone, Alan said. Said he'd messed things up with the only person he ever trusted. He wanted to make it right someday. The words landed like a punch to the sternum. Then Alan added softly, if you found his key, then you deserve to know the truth about what really happened before he disappeared. Alan's breathing crackled softly through the phone, like he was bracing himself. Leo didn't run off with your money, he said. He wasn't trying to screw you over. He left because he was scared, terrified, really. I clenched the USB in my hand. Scared of what? Me? No, Alan said. Scared of being found. The room seemed to constrict around me. Found by who? He got mixed up with a group online, Alan continued. Not criminals, exactly, but people who treated crypto like a new religion. When the coins started climbing, they pressured him hard to hand over the wallet. Threats, harassment, doxing. He didn't tell you because he didn't want you involved. My pulse pounded. Pieces snapped into place. Leo's paranoia near the end, the sudden withdrawal, the way he'd started checking the peephole twice before leaving the apartment. He took the laptop and key because he didn't want them coming after you, Alan said. He told me you'd lose everything if they thought you had access. I sank back into my chair, breath shaky. All these years, I'd believed he'd betrayed me, but he'd been protecting me from danger I never knew existed. Alan's voice cracked. He meant to come back once it was safe, but the accident happened before he could. I closed my eyes. The truth hit with devastating clarity. Leo hadn't abandoned me. He'd shielded me, at the cost of his own life, and the key in my hand was the final remnant of a promise he never got to keep. I stayed on the phone with Alan for a long time, long enough for the sun to slip behind the buildings outside my window, long enough for the USB in my hand to stop feeling like evidence and start feeling like something closer to forgiveness. When the call finally ended, I just sat there, staring at the tiny metal drive that had carried a decade of misunderstanding. I thought I'd feel relieved, but what came instead was a slow, aching humility. All those years I'd spent resenting Leo, painting him as the villain in a story I barely understood. He'd been fighting battles in silence, protecting me in ways I never recognized. And I had turned that silence into a wound I carried long after he was gone. Eventually, I opened my laptop. My hands shook, but not from fear anymore. More from the weight of choosing what came next. With a steadying breath, I plugged in the USB. A single encrypted wallet file blinked onto my screen, along with a text document titled simply, "For Marcus." I didn't open the wallet. Not yet. Instead, I opened the document. I owed him that much, to read his words before touching a single cent of whatever he left behind. Because now I understood. This wasn't about money. It was about finishing a story neither of us got right the first time. Leo's final message wasn't long, barely a page, but it hit harder than any truth I'd uncovered so far. He apologized first in that fumbling, earnest way he always had when we were 19. He wrote about the threats, the fear, the shame of dragging me into something he never meant to turn dangerous. He wrote that disappearing had been the only way he knew to keep me safe. And then he wrote something that floored me. The wallet is still split 50-50. Your half is untouched. If you're reading this, it means my plan failed and I didn't make it back. So take what's yours. Please, don't let my mess ruin the rest of your life. I sat there trembling, staring at the blinking cursor beside his final line. Thank you for trusting me before I earned it. Opening the wallet took another hour of internal war. But eventually I did it. Numbers filled the screen. More zeros than I'd expected. Enough to tip my life on its axis. Leo had protected my half for years, through chaos I never saw. And just like that, the narrative I'd lived in of betrayal, stupidity, loss, shifted into something gentler, heavier, infinitely more complex. I didn't touch the funds. Not that night. Not the next morning. Instead, I made a list of things I wanted to rebuild: trust, direction, the part of myself I'd buried in caution after Leo disappeared. In the weeks since, I've realized something I wish I'd understood years ago. Regret is heavy, but misunderstanding is heavier. I spent so long punishing myself for trusting Leo, resenting him for running, letting that one moment define the edges of who I believed I was: careless, gullible, unworthy of real loyalty. But the truth he left behind cracked all of that open. Now, when I think about him, it's not with anger or bitterness. It's with a strange, quiet gratitude. He didn't get everything right, God, neither did I, but he tried to save the only friend he felt he had. And he carried that hope, that responsibility all the way to the end. I've decided to keep some of the funds and donate the rest in his name. Not because I owe him, but because I finally understand what he was trying to build for both of us. A future where fear didn't get the final say. I still triple-check my passwords. I still back up my photos twice. But I'm learning to trust again. Slowly, deliberately, without bracing for disaster every time someone reaches toward me with good intentions. Here's the lesson I'm taking with me. Sometimes the stories we write about ourselves are just shadows cast by truths we haven't learned yet. And sometimes, if we're lucky, someone leaves behind exactly what we need to step out of them.